Hello, Brubs. We're back with The World of Keane, 32 Paintings and Drawings by Walter Keane, the purported artist of the Big Eyes series of paintings. Until it was revealed, supposedly, that his wife, or ex-wife at this point, they're both dead, but was the actual artist. We don't know. Chapter 16, The Price of Fame. You are a target. The trial was held on June 29, 1958. The prosecution went through 27 prospective jurors before selecting the necessary 12. My attorney, Robert Croninger, said that he would accept any 12 individuals. He then informed persons selected he was making his debut in a trial by jury case and that he hoped they would forgive his mistakes. The prosecution had 7 witnesses against me. 2 were police officers. The testimony of each witness was heard by the jury without the presence of the other witnesses. 2 of the policemen told nearly identical stories. 4 told nearly identical stories, but the accounts of the 5 other persons were entirely different from one another. Harry Smith, manager of the Hungry Eye, testified that I had been crawling on the floor while wearing a 3-cornered hat fashioned from a napkin. He later added that he had seen the artist throw a young lady bodily at Don Adams, the comedian. Following Smith's testimony, District Attorney William Austin called Frank Weber, publicity agent for the Hungry Eye. Weber said that he had seen Keane grabbing women patrons and that I tossed a telephone book at his stomach. To corroborate this account, Sue Stanley testified that I had made a play for her, throwing my arms around her while she was at the cigarette machine. She insisted that I said, "You are beautiful, honey. Let's have some fun." Finally, Banducci was called to the stand. He told the jury that the incident had begun with a party at the Hungry Eye, from where the action shifted upstairs to Ernie and Julie's club. Banducci asserted that he had merely tried to grab my arm to ask that I apologize to Sue Stanley, who had accompanied him. Somehow, he recounted Nadine Ulrich, a pretty 29-year-old stenographer, had been hit in the collarbone. The fabrication of these lies was almost too much for me to tolerate. For 3 days, I listened to stories of an incident that had no parallel with the truth. As Croninger and I waited impatiently for our turn on the stand, we both realized that I would have hung for sure if Nadine had died from her injuries. At last, my defense began. Croninger called Nadine to testify. He asked her if she had been tossed about, as several of the prosecution's witnesses had asserted. Nadine identified herself as the woman who had supposedly been roughed up by the artist. In fact, she testified there had been no tossing about at all. The truth was that she had been hit very hard by a man now present in the courtroom. Croninger responded, "Well then, Miss Ulrich, will you please show the court who that man is?" Nadine pointed to Enrico Banducci. Croninger persisted, "While you are pointing, please tell us this man's name." Still pointing at him, she said, "Banducci is the man who struck me on the evening of March 11 in Ernie and Julie's bar. I was with Walter Keane having a drink at the bar when Banducci swung at Walter and hit me." Hearing this, the judge interrupted. "Banducci is not the one on trial. It is Keane." Nadine continued, "Your Honor, it was Mr. Banducci who knocked me unconscious, not Mr. Keane." With that revelation, the judge became very angry and impatient. Addressing the prosecution, he warned, "You all can be held on perjury charges." Then he turned to me, "Mr. Keane, do you wish to prosecute these 7 individuals?" "No, I do not, Your Honor," I replied. There was no glory or satisfaction in my acquittal. My grandmother cautioned me, "Never embarrass your family." My family, friends, and I had already endured so much negative and untrue publicity that I saw no reason to be vindictive and possibly subject us all to more bad press. I wondered how much damage had been done by the coverage of the trial. Would my visitation rights with Susan be adversely affected? During the proceedings, I had observed a close friend of Barbara's in the rear of the courtroom. She was busily taking notes. I knew that Margaret and Jane had been grilled by curious reporters on my behavior. Even after the acquittal, persistent newspaper people asked me to show them how I had hit Nadine. Often I heard visitors to my gallery whispering about the artist who beats up girls in bars. There are two interesting postscripts to the Banducci incident. Several months following the trial, I discovered that a member of the jury was married to one of the policemen who testified against me. Also, my attorney, Robert Croninger, soon received an appointment as a judge of the Superior Court of the state of California. A San Francisco newspaper reported the appointment featuring a photograph of Enrico Banducci with Robert H. Croninger's name under it. I was advised, had I wished to pursue the issue of libel against some of the more irresponsible members of the media, I could have done so and easily won. I did not consider a lawsuit against the press seriously because the First Amendment seemed to support and even encourage such scandalous reporting. Since my traumatic incident, however, other well-known personalities have challenged the integrity of the media and their apparent license to kill and exploit a celebrity's reputation. I am happy to note that dedicated performers like Carol Burnett have received some compensation for the terrible wrongs done them by the press. As I reflected upon the trial and the resultant publicity, I realized that a public person pays a high price for recognition and remuneration. I think it's remuneration. The relationship with my marriage to Margaret were consequences of my fame, and the vulnerability that accompanies it. If I had been a struggling painter as Margaret was when we met, I am certain that she would have never bothered to pursue me as a lover or as a mentor. She saw me as her ticket to notoriety and fortune. What's up, bruv? What do you got? Similarly, I reasoned my reputation as a flamboyant artist, fond of nightlife, and booze had enhanced Banducci's chances of receiving considerable publicity for himself and the Hungry Eye. Why had he gone to such lengths to be sure that the case went to trial with 5 of the witnesses carefully instructed in a massive lie? Croninger and I both noted how often Banducci mentioned the nightclub during his testimony. The newspapers cooperated nicely by referring often to him and his business, too. In my naivete, at that time, I saw little of the sordid side of fame. I was intoxicated with the exposure to other personalities of the arts. The recognition in public places, much like Colette and I shared in Europe years before, and the money that seemed to flow endlessly. Besides, my friendship with some celebrities was just plain fun. I especially remembered an incident with Red Skelton in the early 1960s. Red and David Rose were in San Francisco staging a spectacular at the Opera House. What do you got, bruv? Naivete. I don't think that's what it was. Maybe it was naivete. Red and I decided to publicize our respective endeavors by parading in front of the Opera House and through the streets of the city with sandwich board signs announcing Red's and David's opening and my paintings. The press recorded this event, and crowds gathered to see us clowning around. I don't think that's spelled right, honestly. In a rare mood after the publicity promenade, Red suggested that we go across the street. on Van Ness Avenue to view the 3 new Rolls-Royce cars on display in the showroom. Oh, God. I can't turn it. Inside the showroom, we discovered that all doors to the cars were locked. Red announced to the salesman that he would like to sit in one of the cars. At that point, the manager entered the scenario to tell us that company policy did not permit passersby to get inside the cars. Red did not care for the company policy and ushered me out of the exit. Out the exit. I didn't know this guy was ghetto. Out the exit. As we were leaving, we saw a young man getting out of a new Rolls. Red asked him if he liked this car. I assume that's with Harpo. The young man replied enthusiastically, "It's a classic. Would you like to take it for a drive?" He added that he was the sales representative for Rolls. Red agreed to a test drive of the car, and we both climbed in. I sat in the back seat while Red drove and listened to the chatter of the salesman who insisted that we go up and down the hills of San Francisco, as well as onto the freeway. Naivete, naive. I think it's naivete. It's not Eve. Naivete. Naivete. No way. I think it's naivete. Naivete. Anyway, after an extended spin through the city, we returned to the agency where Red parked directly in front of the main entrance. Looking straight at the young, accommodating salesman, Red said, matter of factly, "Those 3 Rolls Royces on the showroom floor, I'll take them now." The salesman looked at me in disbelief. I responded, "You heard the gentleman. Wrap them up." In a state of shock, the young man proceeded to fill out the necessary paperwork. Red paid cash for the cars on the spot. It was his way of dealing with the rigid sales manager of the agency. Was Red Skelton really that rich he could afford three fucking Rolls Royces? The 3 Rolls Royces were delivered to Red's home on the Tamarask Golf Course in the Cathedral City near Palm Springs. One of them was always at my disposal when I made any of my frequent visits to his home. On one occasion, Red offered to give me one of the cars in exchange for a couple of my paintings. I did not feel justified in taking that kind of luxury gift from him and politely refused. Generous, kind, and committed to good, decent entertainment for the family, Red Skeleton epitomizes the ingenuity, dedication, and sincerity of a real performer. He sees something humorous in the most mundane of situations. We enjoyed many hysterical moments together, such as the one portrayed in the accompanying photo taken by Frank Sinatra, one of Red's neighbors. Another of his neighbors, Harpo Marx, joined us for the backyard antics. Great times. Friendship with individuals like Red in moments of hilarious abandon made notoriety worthwhile. Without some fame and fortune, I would never had the opportunity to know such personalities and to appreciate their humaneness. Yes, he was wealthy, but didn't flaunt it everywhere. Also a clown artist. Just, I mean, I don't know how much a Rolls Royce was in 1960, but it just seems expensive for someone to buy 3 of them. Friendship with individuals like Red, blah, blah, blah. At times, I wondered why well-known celebrities bothered with a painter obsessed with capturing on canvas the wide-eyed waifs of the world. The closest I ever came to understanding their fascination with my work was through the words of gentle, tender, beautiful actress Jean Seberg, who said to me, "You are the artist and the father of those wonderful, soulful-eyed children. They are so very meaningful to me." I had begun to realize. That's why I doubt that word was spelled right. There's a lot of errors in this book. I had begun to realize that the eyes of the Keane children communicated more than misery and neglect. As often happens with any artist and his work, the critics see more in the paintings than the creator intended. One writer who had followed my work over the years and had visited me in New York and Sausalito asserted that, and what did he assert? Keane's rendering of these eyes take on a threefold manifestation: as objective form, as subjective content, and as a symbol, almost in fact a plastic causeway between vision seen by the viewer as the subjective content that gives his work an emotive fission that explodes continually, almost in the manner of an infrared flash, from the very firmness of line and contour that work as form, an unparalleled sense of formal structure, alternately spouting forth from and seen within. These eyes are consummate summation of the anguish, the fear, the despair, and yet the flame-like hope of a world racked not only by momentous political cataclysms, but assaults on former seemingly immovable investments of simple religious and intellectual faiths, buttressed at the time by cultural frameworks that seemed then so unflinchingly embedded, and now merely terrifyingly evanescent. Although such favorable in-depth analysis of the eyes gratified my painter's ego, I was anxious that the layperson, with limited understanding of artistic form and content, be touched and moved by the lost children. I had always intended the winsome waifs to transcend geographic and linguistic parameters. With that purpose in mind, I began and completed the most significant painting thus far in my career. Our Children is a landmark in my development as an artist. Are expensive always. Yeah, bruv. Chapter 17, Our Children. See how long this chapter is. Very short one, I think. Yeah, literally 2 pages. Guess I'm going to page or chapter 19. Maybe. I've only gone 17 minutes up. Chapter 17. Our Children. Our Children is a landmark in my development as an artist. Isn't that what he just said? Our Children is a landmark in my development as an artist. Our Children is a landmark in my development as an artist. Not only does it stand alone of its own merit, but it is also a prologue to my masterwork, Tomorrow Forever. This canvas, with its children of multi-ethnic diversity, was painted with the burning hope of the artist that these youngsters of the world might look down from a wall of the conference room at the summit meeting of the world powers, so that the heads of state and leaders gathered there to debate peace and war would be reminded for whom they were deliberating. I wanted to remind them that the future lies in the lives and faces of these children of the world, who reflect all of society in its most touching and sensitive form. Let's take a look at this painting. Our Children. More like Epstein's Island's children. My good friend and collector of the fine art, Mr. Wally Runswick, and his partner, co-owners of the Prescolite Manufacturing Corporation, purchased Our Children and donated it to the United Nations Children's Fund on September 12, 1961. It now hangs in the United Nations Permanent Collection. The presentation of Our Children was a gala occasion. Joan Crawford was the hostess and picked up the tab for the party. It was attended by many famous people from America and around the world. Invitations were sent to people of politics and the business world, as well as from the artistic world. The guest of honor was a statesman, a leader, and a great Swedish gentleman, Dag Hammarskjöld. He spelled that wrong, too. It's got a J in there. Secretary of the United Nations. Wasn't he a communist? There were tremendous coverage from the press and television. The hell's this? Dabba dabba babba dab replied to your comment. Who the fuck is that? There was tremendous coverage from the press and television. Cameras and reporters were everywhere. I appeared on the NBC Tonight Show with Jack Parr, where he talked for several minutes uninterrupted, saying, "Our Children" is the greatest painting he had ever seen. I mean, it's an okay painting, but I mean, it's nowhere near the top painting ever. I whispered to Jack, there's Rembrandt, Vermeer, and Degas. Jack said, well, at least it is the greatest painting I have ever touched. Our Children has been exhibited in many major museums of the world. It has been seen by millions of Americans on television networks. It has appeared in more than 200 magazines and newspapers in the United States, as well as many periodicals abroad. In addition, the United States Navy made use of the original for its Project Handicap overseas. Elated over the international acclaim accorded to Our Children, I felt a sense of mission for world peace. With the Cold War at its height, I knew the importance of improving relations with the Soviet Union. Diplomatic channels had not been successful. Would a cultural exchange open new doors of communication? I was eager to learn more about the Russian artist and to share my paintings and ideas. With an elaborate idea in mind, I went to Washington, D.C. to see if I could indeed take the lost children to the people and artists of the Soviet Union. He's going to get world peace. Oh, there it is. So much for world peace. Chapter 18, Disappointment. My idea was to exhibit paintings of the lost children in Moscow, Leningrad, and other major cities of the Soviet Union. Was it still Leningrad in the 60s? I guess it was. I wanted to visit personally 40 individual Russian artists and to purchase a painting from each one of them. Their works would then return with me to the United States, where I would arrange for exhibitions from California to New York. Thus, the American public would have access, even if limited, to the art world of the USSR. Once in Washington, D.C., I made an appointment with a longtime friend, Senator William Nolan, who was then Senate Majority Leader. Having explained my plans to Bill, I was delighted that he, too, felt the artistic exchange was a positive, plausible idea to encourage mutual understanding between the two superpowers. He offered to call John Foster Dulles, Secretary of State, to arrange an appointment for us with the Russian ambassador. Less than a week later, Bill Nolan and I were welcomed to the Soviet embassy. In his powerful, convincing manner, the senator presented my plan to the Russian diplomats. They were guarded but cordial with us. Be cordial. One of them explained that he and the others would have to discuss the proposition at length with Soviet officials in Moscow. I said that I understood perfectly and left one of my original paintings with them to facilitate their discussion and decision. I returned to California. 2 weeks passed. One morning at 7 a.m., I was awakened from a deep sleep by the telephone. The caller identified himself as an official of the Soviet embassy in Washington. The rest of his words are engraved in my mind forever. Our office group thinks it would be an excellent plan for you to have an exhibition of your paintings in our country. However, we have a directive from Moscow stating that our government feels you would make trouble for the Russian people. For that reason, we are instructed to inform you that we cannot grant you a visa for your exhibition at this time. Moscow has declined your proposal. Although half asleep at the beginning of the conversation, I was now very much awake and disappointed. Trying to keep the official on the phone To get more information, I asked if there was anything I could do to change their minds. Could I just exhibit my paintings in Moscow and Leningrad, thus reducing my trip to two cities? Or could I just go alone and not bring any of my work but paint while I was there? I emphasized that I truly wanted to visit the Russian painters in their studios to buy some of their work and bring it back to the United States. I want to try to help your artists. Maybe there is something I can do. We can learn from each other, I pleaded. The caller interrupted. Mr. Keane, this is direct from Moscow. It is a refusal. They feel that you would make trouble for the Russian people. Sincerely interested in promoting goodwill, I could not understand the suspicion of the Russian government. 2 years later, I made another attempt at implementing the exhibition idea when the Soviets announced plans for a cultural exchange between the US and the USSR. Again, the officials felt that I would make trouble for the Russian people. Following the second rejection, I considered any further effort to be futile. I surmised that the Soviets must have suspected me to be a spy because of the many friends I had in state and national government. Nothing could have been further from the truth, as I have always prided myself on being apolitical. I wonder if the Soviet caller knew. In 1957, the Russians honored me by celebrating my birthday. The Russians had hurled into the heavens a Libra metal spear. They called it Sputnik. I should have written them a thank you note. A year later, a second Sputnik flew into the heavens, this time carrying a dog. Some months passed. Eisenhower approved $1 billion of federal money for research and education. So, the Russians celebrated my birthday and helped our schools and colleges. After the fiasco with the Russians, I consoled my wounded pride by total dedication to my painting. Our children continued to receive acclaim throughout the Western world. Praise for it reaffirmed my belief that most adults care deeply about the children of the world. From whatever nation they come, the success of the multi-ethnic theme and my desire to bridge the cultural barriers among peoples had planted more seeds of a vision for my masterwork. The laborious creation of it consumed reams of paper and sketches in 7 years of my life. Meanwhile, Margaret and I seldom saw each other. Our only regular moments together were on weekends when Susan came to visit. Unknown to me at the time was the fact that Margaret had hired her own press writer, agent, and promoter. Of course, she had every right to do so, but I feel that she should have informed me. Whenever I was interviewed for a newspaper or magazine article, I asked the reporter to include Margaret in any way possible to make mention of her paintings. Although she used the surname Keane, she had never been faithful to me as a wife. Also unknown to me then was the fact that shortly after our marriage, she began having an affair with a man whom she had met on that ill-fated trip to Hawaii. I thought he already talked about this. I thought he caught her fucking in the car. In spite of the emotional and physical distance between Margaret and me, I felt genuine affection for her daughter, Jane. Since her dental and cosmetic surgery, Jane's self-concept had improved greatly. She and Susan enjoyed going places together. The three of us often visited galleries and museums. In December of 1963, I invited Jane to join Susan and me on a trip to Paris. I wanted to show Jane the Louvre and my studio at Montmartre. Susan told Jane all about Paris and the wonderful French restaurants with their exquisite meals. Jane was overjoyed with the idea of a trip to France. She and Susan could talk of nothing else. Shortly after I had made our reservations, Margaret announced that she too should see Paris. She thought it would be good for her image as a painter. I agreed with her in principle, although I found it sad that her primary motive for going was not to see the great works of art housed in the museums of Paris. We arrived in one of the worst blizzards ever registered in the history of Paris. To be within walking distance of the shops, we stayed at the Hotel Krillian across the street from the American Embassy. The Krillian was well known as the Paris residence of Charlie Chaplin. Shortly after our arrival, I telephoned a friend, Buddy Weiss, managing editor of the Paris edition of the New York Herald Tribune. I asked him to loan me one of his best photographers for a day so we could shoot some publicity photos of Margaret's first visit to Paris. Buddy said that he would send a photographer to our hotel the following morning. The next day we visited the Louvre. The photographer took pictures of Margaret in front of the Mona Lisa. Then we went to Notre Dame and walked along the Seine. The book stands were closed, as were the flower stands. Paris was just too cold. There were more photos in the cafes at Montparnasse. From there, we drove over to Saint-Germain-des-Prés, down Rue Bonaparte, past the École des Beaux-Arts, where I had attended art school almost 20 years before. Again, we crossed the Seine, and I pointed out the Opera House to the left on the way to Montmartre. We made a stop in Place Pigalle. I explained to Margaret and the children that in 1892, a great artist, Toulouse-Lautrec, painted the dancing girls there at the Moulin Rouge. Come, Margaret, I invited. We will take a picture of you in front of the Moulin Rouge. Move along and swing around. Act like the dancers Lautrec painted, not like a bored observer. She questioned, what did you say his name was? I replied, Count Henri Toulouse-Lautrec, a nobleman by birth, a great artist, who had a strong need to be seen, touched, and loved, but was born a dwarf and a freak in his world of great military men. He was laughed at and unaccepted among his peers. He abandoned his ancestral home for the bohemian quarters and an artist's life in Paris. Seizing the opportunity to expose Margaret to some essential elements of art history, I also hoped she could emphasize with Lautrec's struggle for self-esteem and recognition. I continued by describing to her Lautrec's painting, The Battle of the Flowers, which had always carried a special message for me. Among the glorious blooms, one sees the stronger flowers overshadowing the weaker ones. Only 16 years old when he created this masterpiece, to me this was like a self-portrait. Lautrec portrayed his personal battle to survive, to bloom, and to shine. Lautrec's versatility is revealed in the memorable lithographs of life as he saw it at the Folies Bergère. As he had entered to all worlds, much of his time was spent painting the horrors and houses of prostitution. I told Margaret and the girls about a painting that I considered to be an outstanding work, A Whore on a Toiler. Another fine creation was a prostitute making the beds, and yet another delightful painting features the girls holding up their dresses to show their bodies waiting for the routine medical inspection required by their trade. Margaret was interested in this capsulized version of Lautrec's life. I concluded by telling her that the French painter had died at age 37, perhaps because of his overindulgence in alcohol or loneliness, or both. Her silence and her intense focus upon Lautrec's brightly painted dancing girls at the Moulin Rouge caused me to reflect upon Margaret's naivete and her ignorance of the art world. Here she was in Paris on her first trip to Europe, and the continent of the great masters. She had neither read about the painters whose style she copied, nor had she studied artistic techniques seriously. She had decided that her apprenticeship to me was sufficient instruction to become a recognized artist. She viewed me as her shortcut to success. I thought about my years of study, travel, and single mindedness in capturing the lost children. I had always given freely of my knowledge and expertise in an effort to encourage other aspiring painters. Among them, only Margaret had interested my guidance as a substance. Jesus Christ. Among them, only Margaret had interpreted my guidance as a substitute for her own study and dedication. She alone had assumed that instant notoriety was worth any price, including that of her own creativity. Reluctantly, we pulled ourselves away from the Moulin Rouge and headed toward the Place des Tertres, located in the heart of Montmartre, where I had first painted in my studio. The wind was strong and the air was bitingly cold. Still, there were artists working the streets in hope that a buyer might come along. Remembering my days there and the struggle for clients in the beginning, I asked three of the street painters to come in out of the chill and join us at La Catherine's for a drink. One of them, Gil, had recognized me, and I him. He remembered the red tassel on my beret and the scenes of the lost children in Montmartre. Gil remarked, "Even before you were famous, Monsieur Keane, you stood out in a crowd. That red tassel on your cap was really a bit too much." We all laughed. After several drinks and some additional publicity shots of Margaret with the street artists, I suggested that we return to the hotel before dark. The girls were chilled to the bone and readily agreed. En route to the hotel, the photographer took a few last pictures of Margaret with the Sacre Coeur in the background. Pleased with his tenacity in spite of the freezing weather, I invited him to join us for another drink in the bar of the hotel. Upon arriving, Margaret and I sent Susan and Jane upstairs to the room for a warm bath. We then sat down with the photographer to discuss details of the prints. I asked that he bring us one good 8x10 glossy of each good negative and all of the negatives when the photos were developed. I paid the photographer handsomely and waited for him to leave. He appeared reluctant to go and kept looking at Margaret. I soon realized that some previous arrangement had been made between the two of them. She announced that she was going home with the photographer. I was aghast. Here we were on a family trip, and Margaret felt like having a one-night stand with the publicity photographer whom I had hired. Maintaining as much composure as I could, I announced emphatically for their mutual benefit, "My wife and I are having dinner with our children. Good night, sir." The photographer departed immediately, and I stared in disbelief at Margaret. She seemed unperturbed. I considered discussing the incident with her, but decided against it. Clearly, she had no more pride or self-esteem now than she had when she thrust herself upon me 8 years before. My experiment with Eliza Doolittle was a disaster. I, as Henry Higgins, had been a failure. Shortly after our family vacation to Paris, I instructed my attorney to draw up the necessary papers for a divorce from Margaret. My directions were to give her everything and anything she wanted, but to get rid of her. In retrospect, I wondered why I waited so long. Surely I could have found another, less stressful means than marriage to Margaret to assure visitation rights with Susan. I guess that she felt my usefulness to her had outlasted itself because Margaret, unknown to me, had consulted an attorney for a legal separation a year before and had, after our Paris trip, she too filed for divorce. There was no soul-wrenching traumatic separation this time. I had never respected Margaret as I had Barbara. I had never loved her either. The deepest emotion I could ever muster for her was pity, In my sincere effort to give Margaret dignity and self respect, I feared that I had unleashed a misfit whose distorted perspective would bring shame and disgrace on me and the other artists she copied. In the back of my consciousness, I could almost hear grandmother's admonition. You, trusting Walter, have been victimized by this woman who will bring more disgrace to the Keane name. Little did I know then how prophetic that elusive thought was. Margaret can now say she saw Paris. Yeah, she can. That's going to be all, bruv.